This video is brought to you by Skillshare, more on them later in the video. We're jumping right back into another round of Minecraft mobs as monsters. As I tend to do with sequels on this channel, I went through the comment section of the first video and pulled a whole bunch of the most common suggestions that I saw to fuel the art for this episode. You all gave me tons of great ideas, so let's just get right into them, shall we? Let's go! Hit like, if you want. Subscribe, if you feel like. But either way, enjoy the show. For weeks past my time spent on the mysterious isles of the mining colonies, I couldn't stop thinking about what else there could be to discover there. So I once more decided to return, and it seemed like the perfect time to arrive as an interesting event was transpiring there. A villager who'd recently turned 18, Stephen the Bold, was training to be the new captain of the island guard. It seemed he'd been charged with hunting down a few of the more nefarious creatures on the island as trials to prove himself. So naturally, following his exploits was a perfect opportunity to safely witness some of the more dangerous creatures to be found in the region. His first task, after my arrival, was to fight off a group of an unusual species of merfolk, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The drowned sea skulkers are humanoid-appearing but animalistically minded creatures who frequently attack islanders that get too close to them or their waters. The islanders claim that these creatures are undead. They also made this claim about the skeletal Phantos on my last voyage here, and it seems they believe this to be true about many creatures in the area. And while I was initially skeptical, later events on this voyage would make it difficult for me to believe that their claims were false. Regardless of the origins of these creatures though, they continued to fascinate me as Stephen hunted down a group that had come too close to the waters near a local village. Despite being a fairly unintelligent species, some did wield weapons, specifically tridents. I asked one of my guides where they came across such weapons, and the guide claimed that the creatures simply came into being with the tridents. While my guides were very pleasant and gracious, I did at times find their information a bit unhelpful, as I highly doubt this claim to be true, though this whole trip has made me question many things. Anyway, the final interesting note of these creatures is how sensitive their skin is to the sun. Stephen managed to lure one of them onto land, and not long after stepping onto the surface, its skin began to bubble, then smoke, and finally burst into flame. It tried to return to the water soon after, but Stephen made quick work of it before it could. They'll apparently come onto land more readily at night and are safe then, but waiting to witness that event wasn't an option. Stephen the Bold had dealt with the creature, and then he was off to face another task. Now with this drawing, overall I really like how it turned out, but there's two things about it that are a little bit iffy to me. One is the nose of the creature. I tried to make it a little bit more zombie-like and a bit more skeletal, but it turns out a little bit pig-like, which definitely wasn't the intention. And then also just the giant seaweed that I put around the character kind of messes up the sense of scale, which is something I talked about in the last episode as sort of a problem with some of the art in these episodes. It makes this guy feel like he's really, really tiny because the seaweed is supposed to be massive, but it looks like it could just be regular seaweed. Hopefully that doesn't bother other people too much. As I said, besides that, I like how most of this turned out. And my favorite thing about it is probably the textures I put on the character. The cuts in his skin and the mossy growth growing on him, and his tattered clothes. I think all of that turned out really well. Anyway, let's take a look at the final result of our drowned creature. The next endeavor I followed Stephen on was to hunt down a creature I'd heard tales about during my last trip to the Isles, but nobody had been willing to take me to find. But now Stephen was looking to not only hunt down one, but 12, the reason for which I'd discover later. These creatures are called the Lank-limbed Enders, and the first of them that we found was alarmed by the lantern that I carried. It turned towards us when the light struck it, and once it made eye contact with me, it charged. Stephen, of course, intervened and struck the creature with his diamond-carved sword, but partway through the battle, in a burst of purple floating specks, the creature vanished. It had teleported to a cliff ledge in the distance, where 3 more of the creatures had gathered. I was worried at first, but Stephen proved to be more than enough for these creatures, even refusing my help when I reached for my own blade. Over the next few hours, I witnessed Stephen slicing through many of these creatures, and I learned everything I could about them in that time. But the first most significant note about them was their teleportation ability. I witnessed this bizarre supernatural form of movement many times over those hours, and I can now no longer claim it to be an impossible feat. When I'd years ago studied the Germanic cave crawlers, who seemingly vanish in puffs of smoke, I stated that it was unproven whether they actually could transport their bodies in a blink. But upon seeing the Lank-limbs move, I'm now much more inclined to believe that it's true. Luckily, while these creatures are hostile as soon as a human looks them in the eyes, they are fairly easy to ward off as long as you're close to water. As soon as these creatures make contact with water, they'll transport away, and when it rains, they'll spend the duration of the storms in their caves. They don't eat or sleep, and the only activity they seem to partake in is digging up rocks or patches of dirt and moving them around for no apparent reason. Everything about these creatures was indeed strange, but possibly most so was that when they're slain, their bodies dissolve into ash, and all that remains is a black eye-like pearl. These were what Stephen was truly after in slaying the creatures. When he had 12 of these pearls, we headed back to his village, where a few bizarre rituals were waiting for us. Now, the Enderman was by far the most requested mob from the last episode, so I knew I had to do him for this episode, and I was excited to work with him, but also a bit nervous because he's so simple design-wise. I mean, lots of the mobs are very simple design-wise because they're all just a few blocks stacked together, but this guy in particular, I was like, I guess I'm just drawing a really tall, lanky, long-armed man with purple eyes? The other design element that I latched onto was what he looks like when his mouth is open, because when he runs at people, his mouth opens up and you can see through his mouth in the game, and I considered doing that, but it didn't really seem like it was going to work out for the design I wanted to make. But I did try to make the shape of his mouth similar to the shape of his mouth in the game. To make this thing a little bit more fantasy looking, almost to make it look like some kind of elven ghoul, I gave it the elf sort of ears, and I don't know if that was the right choice for the Enderman, but overall pretty happy with how this one turned out, so I don't really mind the ear thing. By the way, there won't be design notes for the next two characters because I have longer lore for the bosses. Anyway, let's take a look at the Enderman design. Now I'm gonna get back to more lore and artwork in a second, but first I want to talk to you about the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare, because there's a very specific reason I made today's video a Skillshare sponsored video. In the last Minecraft Mobs episode, I talked about how when I realized I needed to learn to improve how I was drawing backgrounds and environments, I went straight to Skillshare. I looked for a course on digital painting and drawing backgrounds, and of course they had something for me. There were probably a bunch of different classes I could have taken, but the one I took was Digital Art Concept Painting by Siobhan Toomey. But Skillshare doesn't just have classes for drawing. It's an online learning community with thousands of classes made for creative and curious people just like you and just like me. Along with illustration, they've got tons of classes on animation, graphic design, filmmaking, and an important one for me is creative writing. Along with doing lots of artwork, I obviously also do lots of lore and stories for this channel. Right now I'm thinking of taking a class by Link and Michelle called Science Fiction and Fantasy, creating unique and powerful worlds. Hopefully it can help me with some of my original character episodes. And Skillshare is less than $10 a month on an annual membership, which in my opinion is absolutely well worth the price. And of course, because they're sponsoring today's video, the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so you can start exploring your creativity. Highly recommend giving it a try, but for now, back into more Minecraft art. Let's go! When we returned to his village, some of the other islanders took the orbs that Stephen had claimed from the Lank-limbed Enders to prepare for his final test. But before that, he would be made to face down a creature that made the Lank-limbs seem normal in comparison. A few villagers had recently returned from the Nether Plane, a place that I'd traveled to on my last adventures here, where I witnessed the ghastly Pale Flame. They returned with the heads of some skeletal creatures from that realm, and some barrels full of sand. I was awestruck by how much sand and supplies each of the villagers was able to carry, but that oddity would be nothing compared to what they do with what they gathered. They piled up the sand and placed the three heads all next to each other on the stack. Stephen was now fully clad in armor and standing ready for some kind of battle. All the other villagers backed away and an elder stepped forth and chanted something while waving a jewel-coated pickaxe over the skulls. A moment later, the mass shifted and lifted off the ground. The eyes and mouths of the heads began to glow white, and the sand shifted and solidified into a floating skeletal body for the now awakened heads. This monstrosity, Steven's next test to prove his ability to protect the islanders, was a withering skull spewer. It's a creature that can only come into existence when summoned, and it is brought forth in cases like this, to test those in Steven's position. The whole village was made to stand on the edge of the battleground, and Steven had to both kill the creature and protect all the villagers. I was so alarmed by the whole event that I may have missed some details about the creature's attributes, but here is what I learned after it spawned. The skull spewer, as its name suggests, spits bursts of flame and smoke that appear similar to skulls. A smoking blue skull struck Steven partway through the battle, and that blow seemed to do more damage than anything else, leaving Steven tired and disoriented, and his eyes seemingly glazed over with a coat of black. But he did push through whatever that skull had done to him. Steven used a bow and arrow against the creature for the first while of the battle, matching its own ranged attacks, but once he'd injured the beast enough, its body began to glow blue, and it seemed like the arrows were then just bouncing off its glowing aura. He then had to strike the creature up close with his diamond blade. The creature seemed to take endless strikes with very little effect. The battle went on and on, but eventually Steven did land a final blow, and like the Lank-limbs, this creature dissolved into ash as it died. Steven had proven himself in this task, but there was still one more trial to come. I barely slept that night, spending most of my time questioning many of the things I thought I knew about what was possible from the creatures of my world. But more strangeness was still to come with Steven's final test the following day. In the morning, I followed him and some others to an underground temple, where stood a gateway, like the one I'd taken to the Nether on my last trip here, but not quite the same. 11 of the orbs that had been dropped by the Lank-limbed Enders that Steven had collected had been placed around the gateway, and when we arrived, the 12th was laid down. A portal opened and I followed Steven through it to a dark realm where I could quickly see dozens of Lank-limbs wandering about. But we weren't there for them. We traveled through the realm till we found a set of tall black pillars, at the top of which were glowing purple beacons, and circling in the sky above them was a glowing-eyed black dragon. This was Steven's final test. He had to slay the Violet Maud Ender Beast. Like the Skull Spewer, this creature could be spawned by the Islanders via a ritual, once more undertaken to test a would-be guardsman. And while it would certainly be a difficult trial for one man to defeat alone, it was actually a fairly basic looking dragon compared to others I've seen in my travels. It spat purple flames and was not afraid to get close to Steven to strike him, but Steven's blows back actually seemed to do more damage to this creature than they had to the Skull Spewer. The thing that made this trial most difficult was it seemed when the dragon flew close to the purple beacons on top of the pillars, it would heal its wounds. This meant Steven had to scale the pillars and destroy the beacons before he could slay the beast properly. And so Steven's main tactic became that he'd wound the dragon so it would need to fly around the beacons to heal, then in that time he'd use 2 pickaxes to scale the towers and destroy the beacons. But a few times the creature attempted to hit him off of the pillars, making it a very treacherous task. Luckily, he was able to strike a few of them with arrows from afar, and so eventually he did manage to destroy all of the beacons. Then it finally came time to slay the creature. Steven leapt from the final tower and landed on its back. He sliced through its wings with his sword, and the creature flopped towards the ground. It crashed and Steven was flung from its back, dropping his sword. He then drew one of his pickaxes and ran at the downed creature. Just before it could spit another burst of violet flames, he drove the pickaxe straight through its head. The beast thrashed as its entire body began to glow purple. Soon after, it erupted in light and a shower of ashes. Once the beast was slain, a portal appeared in the ground, and we were able to take it back to the island. There, Stephen the Bold was praised for his cunning and bravery. He was properly made captain of the Island Guard, a title he'd truly deserved. And of course, I was left with a much more vast appreciation of the incredible people and creatures to be found on this truly bizarre set of islands. You know, my Ender Dragon design turned out a little bit basic as far as my dragon designs go, so maybe it's about time I do another full dragon episode on this channel. Been a little while, huh? And it's been a little while since I did anything with Godzilla monsters. But anyway, everybody, that's our second round of Minecraft Mobs as Fantasy Monsters, and I'm definitely open to doing a round 3, but so far I do feel like I've used my best ideas. I think the first episode was a bit better than the second episode, but I really dig how some of the stuff in this one turned out too. But I'm totally open to doing other stuff with Minecraft creatures and mobs as well. Saw some suggestions for Transformers and superheroes, but give me more ideas in the comments. Now that I've gotten into the lore of Minecraft a bit more, it's going to be a lot easier for me to do more Minecraft episodes in the future. And this obviously means I'm going to have to keep dipping into the stuff that I get suggested a lot, because this has turned out really well, the SCP superhero stuff turned out really well, so sometime soon I'll probably have to do something with FNAF, I guess. That's another thing I get suggested all the time that I don't really know a ton about. Gonna have to get studying, I guess. But anyway, if you are new to the channel, make sure to check out the previous episode in this series. Maybe also my video game characters as Power Rangers episode, because that's got Steve from Minecraft in it as well. Or check out any number of my Dragon and Beast episodes. Turned Ben 10 aliens into dragons, and My Hero Academia characters and Avengers. Tons of great monstrous stuff on the channel. But besides that, that's all for today. I'm Christian Pearson. This has been PopCross Studios, home of the Nerdy Start videos on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and I will see you all in the next episode on Monday, which, is it gonna be Godzilla creatures as dragons? Yeah, it is. Okay, goodbye.